أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والاسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرذوية والجود الثقفية والنقاوة النقبية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فمن يرد الله أن يهدي يشرح صدره للإسلام ومن يرد الله أن يضله يجعل صدره ضيقا حرجا كأنما يصعد في السماء صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time and to give our condolences to him on these days where we commemorate the martyrdom of his grandfather, a louder salawat. One of the most controversial and challenging questions which has been dealt with by Muslim commentators of the Quran and theologians is the question as to whether Allah actually misguides people. Because when you examine the Holy Quran, there are a number of verses of the Quran that associate the act of misguidance with Allah and say that in fact Allah is the one who misguides. For example, Allah in Surah Al-An'am in chapter 6, verse 125, He says, فَمَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. That the one whom Allah wants to guide, He expands his breast for Islam. And then after that He says, وَمَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيَّقًا حَرَجًا. That the one whom Allah wants to misguide, He makes his breast narrow and constricted. This is one ayat. In another verse in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse number 143, Allah, He says, مُذَبْذَبِينَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ لَا إِلَهَ أُولَئِ وَلَا إِلَهَ أُولَئِ. That these people, they waver back and forth. They are not with this group, nor are they with that group. وَمَن يُضْلِلِ اللَّهُ فَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُ سَبِيلًا. The one whom Allah misguides, you will not find a path for that individual. This is another example. Surat Ibrahim, chapter 14, verse 4. فَيُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. That Allah misguides the one whom He wants to misguide, and He guides the one whom He wants to guide. Another verse, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. That those people who are disbelievers, it is the same if you warn them or you don't warn them. They will never have belief. خَتَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ وَعَلَى سَمْعِهِمْ وَعَلَى أَبْصَارِهِمْ غِشَاوَةٌ. These individuals have a seal upon their hearts, upon their ears, and then upon their eyes there is a covering. When you examine these verses, which are only a number of verses about this topic, you see that each of them on the outward, it suggests that at the end of the day, for somebody to be misguided, it is the doing of Allah. But when we have these verses, there are several problems that arise with these ayat. On one side, these verses are suggesting that Allah misguides mankind. But on the other side, in the Quran, Allah makes it very clear that misguidance is not a positive act, but rather it is a negative act. Why does Allah condemn shaitan in the Quran? Allah condemns shaitan in the Quran because shaitan, he misguides mankind. Further than that, in Surah Al-Qasas, in the 28th chapter of the Quran, Allah mentions a group of individuals. And He describes them by saying, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَدْعُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا يُنصَرُونَ. That there are a group of individuals who are the leaders of those who invite to the hellfire. In other words, these individuals, they would misguide mankind, and on the day of judgment, they will have no supporters. So on one side, Allah in the Quran is condemning the act of misguiding others. But on the other side, there are several verses that say Allah Himself misguides. So you find that this is the first challenge that comes up with these ayat. The second challenge that comes up with these verses is that if we are to say that Allah is the one who guides and misguides, then on the day of judgment, I can say to Allah, oh Allah, I wasn't the agent, I wasn't the one acting. At the end of the day, you misguided me, so why are you punishing me over here? So you find this is the second problem. The third problem with these verses is this. On one side, Allah goes through a great amount of care to guide mankind to the right path. At the end of the day, He has given us an intellect. And He has given us a fitrah and a nature which is pure. He has sent us prophets to know His deen. He has shown us miracles and mu'jizat so we can see there is more beyond the material world. He has sent the A'imma of Ahlul Bayt as the guides for the deen. On one side, Allah, you are taking every step to guide mankind and to ensure the guidance of mankind. But on the other side, you are saying that you are the one who misguides mankind. So over here at the apparent level, there is a paradox and a contradiction. You see, this question has been one of the most controversial questions in Islamic history. And each group, based upon their school of thought, proposed an answer to this question. For example, one group was a group known as the Asharites. The Asharites, the majority of Ahlul Sunnah today, in terms of theology, they are Ashari. What does it mean to be Ashari? Number one, the Asharis, they believe that we are predestined in our action. And at the second level, they believe that good and evil is whatever Allah does. We cannot rationally understand good and evil. So if Allah throws a pious individual into the fire of hell, it's no problem. At the end of the day, it is Allah's power. Allah does what He wants. So you find that this was their opinion. Another group came forth and said, no, this is not the correct understanding of it. There is another understanding. What I want to do tonight in this majlis is to answer this question as to whether Allah is the one who misguides people by examining what the ayat of the Quran and the traditions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam say about this question. And this will serve as a departure point for us to understand how can we use these nights to transform us, and how can we use these nights to gain more guidance from Allah. You see, when you come to the school of Ahlul Bayt, there are a number of the commentators of the Quran, Mufassirun, who discuss this question in depth. One of them, for example, is Allama Tabatabai in his famous work, Al-Mizan. Another is, for example, Shaykh al-Tabarsi in his famous tafsir, Majma'ul Bayan. Another, for example, is the contemporary Iranian scholar, Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. You see, when you look at many of these scholars, when they examine the ayat of the Quran based upon the narrations, the conclusion that they came to is that if you are going to understand misguidance, then you have to understand what is guidance and hidayah. Because when you look at these ayat, they mention that Allah misguides and He guides. It mentions them together. فَيُضِلُّ مَن يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. On one side, He misguides who He wants, and on the other side, He guides who He wants. When you look at the Quran at one level mentions very famously that it is a book which is hudan linnas, a guidance for mankind. But when you look at the opening ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So on one side, this Quran is saying that for all of mankind, this book is a guide. But on the other side, it is saying that only for those who are pious, this Quran is a guide. What this goes to demonstrate is that there are two forms of guidance. Number one is that initial guidance, which is in the realm of your free will. O human being, out of your free will, which God has given you, and through the intellect which Allah has given you, and through the fitrah and that pure nature which Allah has given you, you have all of the tools to believe in the tawheed and the oneness of Allah and to go towards the truth. You see, there were a number of individuals throughout history that even though they didn't believe in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, they were able to recognize the truth because they had it within their intellect and their nature. There is a very famous lady who was a scholar of Islam in the Western academia. Her name was Anna Marie Schimmel. Anna Marie Schimmel translated As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyya into German. And in that introduction, she says that when I was working on this translation of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyya, the work of du'as of Imam Zainul Abidin, there was a point where my mother was ill. And in that time period, in the 60s and the 70s, you didn't have independent hospital rooms. In one room, there would be multiple patients. She says that I was working on my translation, and there was another lady who was laying next to my mother on a different bed, and she was sick. That lady said to me, that what are you working on that day and night you spend over your laptop, over your papers, and you're working over here? She replies by saying that I am working on a book of supplications by a grandson of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. That lady says that you are a Christian. We have our own tradition of hymns. We have our own tradition of prayers, of liturgy. Why are you working on something that came from a Muslim figure that's not from your tradition? She says that I didn't give the answer to that lady at that moment. But when I had completed my translation, I had sent her a copy of that translation. And when she read those du'as, she said that never have I seen the light of God manifest like it does in these supplications and these du'as. You see, these individuals, they were not Muslims, they did not believe in the Prophet, in the Aimma, in the Quran, but at one level, every individual, their nature calls to the truth. And in front of you is the option that God has given this form of guidance to everyone. God gave us the aql. God gave us free will. He gave us choice. In the sense, this guidance is even from Allah. Because if He didn't give us aql, then we would not be guided. So at the first level, you find the first form of guidance is associated with our actions. But then our intellect also tells us that if there is a creator, and He is the one who created all of creation, He is not going to leave the creation alone. He is going to support them so that they live a life of success. And over here you find that the Quran mentions there is a second form of guidance. That, O human being, in Surah Al-Insan, in the 3rd verse, it says, Inna hadaynahu sabil imma shakiran wa imma kafura. That we guided everyone to the path. But now it is up to you. Either you're going to disbelieve or you are going to thank Allah for this guidance. So at the first level, everyone is guided by their own action. God has given us the capacity to act on our own free will and to have our choices determine step 2. And at the second level, if one makes the right choices, God, He supports that individual. You know, Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Ibrahim, there is an ayat over there where Allah, He says that those who believe, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ, that those people who have belief, that they use their intellect, they use their nature to believe in Tawheed, to come to the path of Islam, now Allah is going to make those individuals firm. He is going to give them a second form of guidance that brings them closer towards Him. In another ayat, Surah Al-Hadid, chapter 57, verse 28, Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah. That, O you who believe, the first step is have taqwa. Wa aminu bi rasulihi. The second step is to believe in the Prophet. Then the ayat mentions that when out of your own free will, you have taqwa, you act righteously, and you believe in the Prophet Muhammad, it mentions the result of this action. It says, يُؤْتِيكُمْ كِفْلَيْن مِّن رَحْمَتِهِ. That Allah will give you 2 portions of mercy. وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ نُورًا تَمْشُونَ بِهِ. And He is going to give you a light by which you will walk, that you will know where you are walking by this light, وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ, and Allah will forgive you. So what the Quran is showing through all of these ayat is that, O mankind, at the first level, we gave you all of the tools for guidance. We gave you aql. We gave you the fitrah. If you act righteously, then you gain a second form of guidance. You know, there's one hadith al-Qudsi. It says, Man taqarraba ilayya shibran, taqarrabtu ilayhi dira'an. That the one who moves towards me by the length of a hand, I move towards him by the length of an arm. You know, the mercy of Allah is something which is phenomenal. What Allah does is that, O mankind, if you mess up, if you are misguided, you only move one step back. But when you move towards me, I am going to exponentially increase that progress. Doesn't the hadith say that you sin, Allah writes 1 sin. But when you do a good action, Allah writes 10 for you. What this is going to show is that paradise is why man was created. Hell is the exception. That your natural state of a human being is for paradise. The astathna, the exception to that is the fire of hell. And this is the extent of the mercy of Allah. So Allah, when one makes the right choices, He gives them a second form of guidance, and He describes this guidance also in Surah Al-Ankabut, in the 29th chapter of the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That those who strive in our way, we will guide them to our paths. So on one level, you find that this guidance God has given us. But the Quran is showing that, oh human being, if you want this second level of guidance that is going to take you to the right path, then you need to maintain your actions to keep that guidance with you. Allah says in Surah Ibrahim in the 14th chapter of the Quran, He says, La in shakartum la azidannakum, wa la in kafartum inna adabi la shadid. That if you thank me, O human being, if you do my shukr, I'll give you even more. But if you turn away from my shukr or you disbelieve, then my punishment will come upon you. What this goes to show is that one form of punishment is that Allah removes the second level of guidance from an individual. So at the first level, this discussion was about guidance. Now we come to this pivotal question that many individuals ask. They ask the question that, does Allah actually misguide people? You see, in the way that there are two forms of guidance, there are two forms of misguidance as well. That if you act righteously out of your own free will, which God has given you, then Allah will exponentially increase that guidance. But, O human being, if after being given free will by God, and being given the intellect by God, and being given a pure nature by God, and you make poor choices, you make evil choices out of your own free will, only then Allah will misguide you. You see, when the Quran it says that Allah misguides mankind, this has two meanings. The first meaning is, at the end of the day, guidance and misguidance is from Allah. Why? Because Allah has given us free will. At the end of the day, all of these capacities, they come from Allah. But at the second level, when the Quran says Allah misguides people, the Quran is saying that out of their own free will, they disbelieved in God. And because they disbelieved in God and acted evil out of their own free will, now Allah is punishing them by misguiding them. Now you ask that, what is the dalil and the evidence for this? Everything a person says should have a dalil and evidence. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah that those individuals, fi qulubihim maradun fazadahumullahu marada. That in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 10, Allah is saying that only those individuals who have a sickness in their heart, we increase that sickness within them. In other words, when Allah is misguiding, He is not going to misguide a mu'min, a person who has a healthy heart. Only that person who is sick out of his own free wills, Allah misguides that person. Another ayat. Surah As-Saf, verse number 5. فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُمْ. That when they turned away from the truth, only then Allah turned their hearts away from the truth. So you see, all of these ayat, when they speak about Allah misguiding, what these verses are going to show is that only when an individual makes poor choices and he disbelieves, only then misguidance it comes. But over here, Sahibul Mizan, Allama Tabatabai mentions something very interesting. And what he mentions is that this Allama Tabatabai, this even didn't seem to be in unison with the mercy of Allah. He says that it does not make sense for Allah even at this level to misguide. And he makes a very interesting point. He says that there are certain things in this world that exist. And there are certain things, even though we may think they exist, it is only because the opposite isn't there. For example, very simply, Does darkness exist? No, darkness, it doesn't exist. Darkness is just the absence of light. Allama Tabatabai is saying that misguidance doesn't exist on its own. Misguidance is the absence of hidayat. So when the Quran says Allah misguides, it does not mean that Allah sends a person on a downward spiral if they begin to sin. That is not in line with the rahmat of Allah. But what Allah does is that special hidayat and that special mercy and guidance which comes at the second level, He removes that guidance. And to remove that guidance, even that is enough of a punishment for a human being. So you see, this is that reality of these ayat of the Quran. That when one moves in the path of Allah, Allah increases it exponentially. But when one makes poor choices away from God, that special guidance is removed from an individual. And we find in the traditions that there are certain times in the life of a person where Allah's breath of mercy is upon them. In other words, each of you have felt that there are certain moments that I feel more spiritual. And there are certain moments when my spirituality, it takes a step back. When this occurs, Allah, He gives us certain occasions. And He gives us certain days in the calendar that, oh human being, we understand that your spirituality, it fluctuates. It goes up and it goes down. But don't feel that you are hopeless. There are certain days which are called Ayyamullah, the days of Allah where we will pull you back. And one of those days are the days where you remember Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, Karbala, as I mentioned, is not simply a historical remembrance, but we remember Karbala because it is a devotional act. We remember Karbala because it is an act of ibadah. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam as-Sadiq, in a very famous tradition, when he describes the azan and the mourning of Sayyid al-Shuhada, he says that nafasul mahmum lana tasbih. Nafasul mahmum al-mughtam li dulmina tasbih. وَحَمُّهُ لِأَمْرِنَا إِبَادَةً. You know what the Imam says? The Imam says that sorrowful breathing in the remembrance of that dhulm which occurred upon us Ahlul Bayt is the tasbih of Allah. You know, when you feel anxiety, what happens? You begin to breathe heavy. The Imam says that when it comes to the sorrow of Sayyid al-Shuhada of Ahlul Bayt, even that heavy breathing out of sorrow is considered the tasbih of Allah. And then he says, وَهَمُّهُ لِأَمْرِنَا إِبَادَةً. And that sorrow and that worry for our affair of as Ahlul Bayt is considered to be the ibadah and the worship of Allah. That is why you find these days are an opportunity which has been given by God. You know, there are a number of hadith which describe the importance of an opportunity. You know, there's many of you, some of them, they were here last year in these majalis and they're not here anymore. Either they may not be upon this earth, either they may have lost belief throughout the year, but they're not present anymore. But the fact that you are here, you find that God has given tawfiq and a divine opportunity to sit in these majalis. There is a saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, where the Imam says that al-fursa sari'atul oud. Al-fursa, that a opportunity, it moves away very quickly. But it is batiyatul oud is the wording, but it comes back towards you very slowly. In other words, opportunities, when they pass by an individual, you find oftentimes they don't return to an individual, or after a number of years, you reach that level again. When you look at some of the famous companions of Rasulullah, and you look at some of the famous companions of Ahlul Bayt, and you ask the question, how did they reach their maqam? It is because they use the opportunities in front of them. You know, you have heard the name of Abu Hamza al-Thumali. Many of you in Shahr Ramadan, you recite the dua of Abu Hamza. But who was Abu Hamza al-Thumali? The biography of Abu Hamza says that before he met Imam Zainul Abidin, he was a sariq, he was a thief. That individual who at one point in his life wasn't religious, that he was a known thief, that individual reached the maqam where Imam Zainul Abidin says that he is the Salman of my time period. And another narration, he says that he is the Luqman of my time period. If an individual like Abu Hamza can reach that status, what is stopping us from reaching that status? No, I'll give you another example. There was a companion of Rasulullah. His name was Jundub ibn al-Junada. Jundub ibn al-Junada was from a tribe that was known to rob caravans. And he was one of those thugs that would rob different caravans. One day, his tribe is going to worship their idols. And to worship their idols, they placed a bowl of milk in front of the idol. When they placed that bowl of milk in front of the idol, it is stated that this Jundub was watching the idol. And as he was watching the idol, he notices that a fox, it comes, it tips over the bowl, and it urinates on that idol. Jundub begins to think that these individuals worship this idol as a deity that cannot protect itself from a fox. How is this idol supposed to protect mankind and a human being? So that Jundub, from that moment, I mentioned there were two levels of guidance. From the first level of guidance, he used his fitrah and his aql to recognize that this is not something rational. But now what did he do? Allah gave him that second form of guidance. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who work in our cause, we give them that guide towards our path. So it is stated that this Jundub, after that, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. If we can slightly lower the echo, please, for those who are working in the audio room, slightly. Jazakumullah. Second salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. So this Jundub, you find, he waits for his second level of guidance. And he hears that in Makkah, there is a prophet who says that there is no God but Allah. And he worships in front of the Kaaba with his wife and with his cousin. So this Jundub, he goes to Makkah. When he goes to Makkah, you find that he sits in front of the Kaaba. As he's sitting in front of the Kaaba, Jundub is waiting for Rasulullah. And as he's waiting for Rasulullah, the time of night it comes. As the time of night is coming, a young man comes to Jundub and he says, "Oh man, if you do not have a place to stay, then stay within my home." Jundub sleeps in the house of that man. The second day in the morning, Jundub, he goes back again in front of the Kaaba. He spends all day in front of the Kaaba, all night waiting for Rasulullah. Once again, that second night, that man comes again. This time he says, "Oh man, you slept in my house yesterday, but today you are still waiting. What are you waiting for?" Jundub says that, "If I tell you, do you promise you will not tell anyone why I am here?" That man said, "I swear upon Allah that I will not tell anyone." Jundub says that, "I heard there was a prophet in this town, and I want to meet that prophet." He goes, he meets Rasulullah. He says, "How can I accept Islam?" Rasulullah says, "Don't worship idols. Believe that there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his messenger. Do good and stay away from evil." That Jundub, the moment he does this, Rasulullah says, "Now do not tell anyone." You know what he does? He goes to the Kaaba. He stands in front of the Kaaba. He says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The people, they begin to surround him and attack him until Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, saves him. You know who this Jundub was? This Jundub was that companion by the name of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. This Jundub, when he returns to Rasulullah, he says, "Oh Rasulullah, I've accepted Islam. Now I understand to submit to you. But I have one question. There was one man whose house I slept in on the first night. And this man is that man who resembles your characteristics. I want to know what the name of that man is." Rasulullah says his name is Ali ibn Abi Talib. You see, it's ajib how Allah guides Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. From one realization, he comes all the way to Makkah. And as he's sitting in Makkah, the first person he meets who has a conversation with him is that man whose companion he will be for the rest of his life, Ali bin Abi Talib. So you find these are the companions of Ahlul Bayt, that they used what they had to go in a proper direction, and Allah increased within them. You know, there is another individual, his name was Fudail ibn Iyaz. Fudail ibn Iyaz was a very famous individual who was a thief. He would rob different caravans. It's stated that one day he heard a person in the caravan that he was about to rob recite the verse of the Quran, "Alam ya'ni lilladina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum lidhikrillah." That is it not time for those who believe in Allah for their hearts to have fear out of His remembrance? The moment he hears this ayat, this individual, he says that yes, that time has come. And now I am going to turn back towards Allah. You know, there's an interesting verse of the Quran. And this verse of the Quran is chapter 13, verse 11. Allah in this verse, He describes mankind. You see, if we are going to understand the essence of man, we need to understand this ayat. Allah in this ayat, when He describes each of you, each of us, He says, "Lahu mu'aqqibatum min bayna yadayhi wa min khalfihi yahfadunahu min amrillah." Allah says that each person, in front of him and behind him are angels. These angels, imagine that you're walking somewhere and there's people surrounding you from all sides protecting you. In this way, each human being has these angels that are surrounding him from all sides, protecting him. Then the next portion of the ayat, it says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma bi qawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim." You see, this ayat over here, one scholar from Najaf used to say that if the Muslim Ummah understood only this ayat of the Quran, this would be enough for their development in every single area of knowledge. You know what this verse it says? It says that indeed Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change themselves first. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma bi qawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. That the moment a group of people, they change what is within them, then Allah will create that right opportunity for their entire nation to change. You see, when we look at the greatness of Ashura, the greatness of Ashura is this, is that there was a group of individuals on the side of Imam al-Hussein who changed themselves. And because of that change, these individuals were able to change the entire ummah of Islam. That how heedless was the Muslim ummah. That how much ghafla was the Muslim ummah in. That within 50 years, the grandson of Rasulullah is on the ground of Karbala. That same grandson, each of them knew the tradition, Al-Hassan wal-Hussein Sayyiday Shabab al-Jannah. That Hassan and Hussein are the princes of the youth of paradise. Each of them saw Rasulullah, many of them. that one day Rasulullah is in Masjidun Nabawi. And as Rasulullah is on the mimbar, a 5 or 4-year-old child by the name of Hussein comes into the mosque. And when he comes into the mosque, Rasulullah gets off the mimbar. He picks that child up. Holding that child, he returns to the mimbar. He points towards that child and he says, Hada Husaynun fa'arifuhu wansuruhu. That this is my Hussein. Recognize him, support him. You know, Imam al-Hussein, on the way to Karbala, he met many individuals who didn't join him. And some of these narrations highlight that it was very well known to the Muslim Ummah, all of these traditions. For example, Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab comes to Imam al-Hussein as the Imam is going to Karbala. And as he comes to Imam al-Hussein, he says, "Oh Hussein, I have heard your grandfather say that Hussein will be killed and a group of Muslims will kill him. Those who do not support him will be disgraced." This individual, he knew the tradition, but he doesn't join Imam al-Hussein. The fact that this individual knew the hadith, it goes to show that these narrations were known to everyone. But despite being known to everyone, the day of Ashura, it came. And as the day of Ashura, it came, you find Sayyid al-Shuhada had a small number of companions. And amongst those companions and supporters of the Imam, number 1 was Sayyida Zainab, and number 2 were the children of Sayyida Zainab. You see, what is the masayib of Sayyida Zainab? Now we have entered the nights where we remember the masayib of Banu Hashim. We remember that masayib where a mother bids farewell to her sons. You know, the heart of a mother is as such that if her son comes home late at night, or she doesn't hear from her son, that mother doesn't have peace. She's not able to sleep comfortably. But now On and Muhammad are leaving Sayyida Zainab. You know, on the night of Shab Ashur, the night before Ashura, each of the women would speak towards their children. And as Sayyida Zainab would speak to On and Muhammad, she would say, "Oh On, oh Muhammad, I know that you are the grandchildren of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And I know that you are the grandchildren of Ja'far al-Tayyar. I know what type of warriors you are. I know a time will come when you reach the Furat tomorrow. But when you reach the Furat, make sure you don't drink from the Furat unless the children of Hussein have drank from the Furat." You know, it is stated that the day of Ashura, it comes. Imam al-Hussein gives ijazah to On. He gives ijazah to Muhammad. As these children were fighting on the day of Ashura, On would stand in front of Muhammad when an arrow would come towards Muhammad. And then Muhammad would stand in front of On. But a time it comes, فَقَتَلُوهُ إِرْبًا إِرْبًا, that they are surrounded from all sides. One sword it strikes On, one sword it strikes Muhammad. The moment it strikes both of them, it's stated on one side Imam al-Hussein comes, on the other side Aba Fadl Abbas comes. Now that point it comes that they have to tell a mother that her children have passed away. You know, when they bring the bodies of On and Muhammad to Sayyida Zainab, you know what Sayyida Zainab she does? She places one hand on the body of On. She places one hand on the body of Muhammad. She says, "Rabb رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا هَذَا الْقُرْبَانَ, that, oh Allah, accept this sacrifice from us. But you know, over here, the Maqatil, they don't say that Zainab ran to the battlefield to greet these bodies, that Zainab cried over these children. No, if the Maqtal says that Zainab cried over anyone, it was at the Shahadat of Ali Akbar, when the body of Ali Akbar fell upon the ground. Sayyida Zainab would go to the body of Ali Akbar. You know, in Karbala, Zainab, she doesn't cry. Then after that, they go towards Sham. You know, in Sham, the heads of the Shohada were returned towards the women. That Kulthum would take the head of Abbas, and Farwa would take the head of Qasim, and Rabab would take the head of a 6-month infant. The moment she would see that head, she would say, Amitluka tunhar ya Ali Asghar, that do they even slaughter children like you in the way that they slaughter animals? But as each of the women would take the heads, there were 2 heads of the Shohada that no lady, she took those heads. Those were the heads of the children of Sayyida Zainab Aun and Muhammad. One riwayat, it says that the women of Sham, they began to say that, has the mother of these children passed away? Why is no one taking these heads? Fizza, she replies to them, she says their mother hasn't passed away, but their mother is that lady who is crying, holding the head of her brother. So in Karbala, Sayyida Zainab doesn't cry. In Sham, Sayyida Zainab doesn't cry. But then that point it comes where the caravan of Ahlul Bayt, it returns to Medina. When this caravan, it returns to Medina, the first thing Sayyida Zainab does is she goes to the grave of Rasulullah. She says, Ya Jadda, Ya Rasulallah, if there were not any non-mahram over here, I would show those marks upon my arms when they tied my arms from Karbala towards Sham. After that, what does Sayyida Zainab do? She goes to the grave of her mother Fatima. She goes to the grave of her mother Fatima Zahra. You know what she says at the grave of Janab Zahra? She says, oh mother, whenever anyone goes on a journey, they bring something back with them, oh mother. Oh mother, I have brought the shirt of Hussein for you, oh mother. She places the shirt of Abu Abdullah on the grave of Fatima Zahra. After that, Sayyida Zainab, she returns towards her home. When she returns towards her home, when her husband Abdullah, he sees Zainab, he says, oh lady, why are you entering my house? Oh lady, Zainab isn't within this house. Sayyida Zainab says, oh Abdullah, do you not recognize Zainab anymore? That what did Karbala and Sham do towards Sayyida Zainab? But now that moment it comes that at the end of the day, Sayyida Zainab was a mother. When she goes to the room of Aun and Muhammad, she says, oh Aun, oh Muhammad, forgive your mother Zainab. She had promised her mother Fatima that if she was to cry, she would cry over her brother Hussein. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين يا الله بحق أبي عبد الله. That wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Grant us the shifa of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And allow us to see the duhur of the 12th of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Matam Hussein.